Wonderful attendees of Partition Ensemble. Welcome. If you're seeing this and hearing this, then you have opened the video for my talk, Haunted Desires, Ghostly Methods in Queer and Feminist Performance. My name is Kelly Richmond. I'm currently a PhD candidate at Cornell University. And I'm really thrilled to be here in this strange, virtual, relaxed environment. Working on this presentation has been super helpful for me because I am currently working through the initial impulses of my dissertation project. I've been writing this alongside writing my proposal. And so these are effective firings, ghostly traces, and unfulfilled potentials. And they will need some careful tending to in order to grow into a full research project. And so I hope in the various venues we have for giving feedback and asking questions, if you can share anything you think of, musings, associations, resistances, anything you say will be useful to me at this point because we're really in the initial stages. I also want to say I'm really excited to be on the queer autoethnography panel. Haunting is definitely a form of autoethnography, although I don't theorize it sort of explicitly as that throughout this talk. So I hope those sort of connections and cross mutations will happen. Okay, so let's get started. So today I begin with a question, not an answer, about how ghosts and hauntings emerge as particular scripted situated practices in the overlapping context of feminist, queer art and performance. So sociologist Avery Gordon has defined haunting as that moment of however long duration where things are not in their assigned places, when the cracks in the rigging are exposed, when people who are meant to be invisible can show up without any sign of leaving, when disturbed feelings cannot be put away, when something else, something different from before, seems like it must be done. And from this definition, we can gather that haunting is a phenomenon of displacement, appearance, and interruption, and that this phenomenon is recognized through an effective disturbance that manifests as a call to action. So further, I understand the representations, reproductions, reenactments, remembering, recognition, displacement, disappearance, disorientation, disidentification, and disconnections of performance as crucial to hauntings, manifestations, demands, and responses. So throughout my project, I'm sort of trying to think about how is haunting performance and how is performance haunting, but how are they not necessarily always one another. There's also some important specificity. But Gordon's quote helps us understand the suggestion that haunting's particularity lies in its its signal of something to be doneness, and this reoccurs throughout spectrality studies. So for example, Terry Kastle identifies the something to be doneness as the uncontainable power of the ghostly apparition. To become an apparition was also to become endlessly capable of appearing, and once there, the specter, like a living being, was not so easily gotten rid of. It demanded a response. So I'm curious about what demands are made by queer and feminist hauntings, as well as what methods of response these hauntings make possible. So how do queer and feminist desires fuel both the haunting and the haunted, and reveal the crossings and mergings, partition ensemble, our lovely theme, between the two? To think through some of the desires and demands of queer and feminist hauntings, today I will turn my attention to two projects that I believe indicate the types of very different work haunting does in queer and feminist art. The first project is Allyson Mitchell and Deirdre Louge's installation Lesbian Haunted House, Killjoy's Kastle. In Kastle, performers and spectators confront campy and maximalist reenactments of lesbian feminism's haunted past, complex invocations that trouble the ethical crossings between living with and exorcising ghosts. Secondly, I will examine Syrus Marcus Ware's video installation, Ancestors, Can You Read Us? Dispatches from the Future. In this vivid work of speculative fiction, the great-grandchildren of BIPOC communities send a message of hope from 2072 to their ancestors, promising them they will survive climate change, late capitalism, and white supremacy. Ware describes the video as filled with images of Black, Indigenous, queer, and trans joy. And I see Ancestors, Can You Read Us? as something that haunts from the future and provocatively indicates the power of being haunted not only by the ghosts of trauma and damage, but also the ghosts of hope and desire. In our relaxed format, one thing that I've come up against is getting rights to images. So I have not been able to do this, and I offer this to you instead. Here's some lovely links to some online archives that document Killjoy's Kastle. You can take a look at any of these to see some images of what I'm describing. You might also want to pause my video and watch the 5-minute video tour of the LA Kastle if you're not familiar with the project. These are all totally optional, but just to give you some visual representations because they won't be included in my video PowerPoint. And I'll try to get these links put in the description of the video as well. So take a moment. And I assume you're back. Great. So created by material artists Allyson Mitchell and Deirdre Louge, Killjoy's Kastle reimagines the Christian evangelical hell house as a site of lesbian feminist haunting. This, quote, large-scale multimedia walkthrough installation and performance has been put on so far in Toronto, London, LA, and Philadelphia. Visitors to the Kastle encounter upwards of 15 spooky spaces intricately decorated in Mitchell's signature deep les and maximalist craft styles, crossing rooms such as the crypt of dead lesbian organizations, businesses, and ideas, the terrifying tunnel of 2 adult women in love, and the gender studies professor and riot ghoul dance party. Inhabiting, materializing, possessing these spaces are over 50 performers who embody the most horrific of mythic lesbian figures, such as the polyamorous vampiric granny, the paranormal consciousness raisers, and controversially, the ball-busters. Visitors walking through these encounters are guided by a demented women's studies professor tour guide who provides commentary and contextualizations on the many scenes before dropping the tour group off at the processing room to discuss their experience with some real-life feminist killjoys, who then release them back to the consumer capitalism in the form of ye old lesbian gift shoppy. Killjoy's Kastle is haunted by more than its explicit iconography, by the way it invokes, conjures, and materializes the ghosts of lesbian feminist history. The project is carefully remediated and archived in Inside Killjoy's Kastle, Daiki Ghosts, Feminist Monsters, and Other Lesbian Hauntings, wherein editors Mitchell and Kate McKinney propose that the Kastle's use of queer, camp style, and horror genre imagery are intended to offer alternatives to lesbian feminism's entanglements with white supremacy and trans misogyny. So they say, we need better methods, different methods, speculative, imaginative, and artful methods for enlivening queer past in order to dismantle or build outside of these structures. Killjoy's Kastle asks, to what extent might parody, camp, play, and the exaggerated genres of horror provide one of these dismantling forms of enlivenment? The question builds on a long history of feminist theory that has considered the powers of horror, monstrosity, and the grotesque. So while I share the methodological questions of how queer art and performance can create structures, practices, and relations that dismantle rather than reinforce white supremacy and trans misogyny, my inquiry here is focused more on the phenomenological haunting generated by Killjoy's Kastle than its stylized representations of monstrosity. If we take seriously that the Kastle is truly haunted, what demands do the ghosts make, and what responses are made possible? So to explore one haunted example, let us consider one of the first rooms visitors encounter, the paranormal consciousness raisers. The room is dark and evocative of a carnival funhouse with walls and floors covered in mirrors. Among the mirrors are a number of performers in ghost drag. Like children on Halloween, they wear sheets over their heads with holes cut out for their eyes. The sheets are just short enough to make clear that none of the performers are wearing clothes under their costumes, and thus flashing vulvas decorated with craft supply googly eyes reflect around and around the room. Ginger Brooks Takashi describes her performance thus. Trapped in a darkened, carpeted, mirrored den, anonymized by donning sheets and face paint around our eye holes, we popped our vaginas up and out. How much of us was visible? Was that a reflection, or did we just flash you in the eye with a flashlight? Was it the smell of our holes, or was it the sight of them that stopped you in your tracks? So, who is haunting and who is haunted by the apparitional vulvas in this encounter? As explained by the script of the demented women's studies professor, the room is a reference to how second wave feminism's consciousness raising groups have been reduced to, quote, a cultural stereotype about lonely, uptight suburban white women gazing at their own vaginas. Further, at the LA rendition of the Kastle, the paranormal consciousness raisers would chant, my genitals are my pleasure. They don't define my gender. Thus, as they blind visitors with flashlights and vulva flashing, the consciousness raisers invoke the apparitions of trans-exclusionary radical feminists, for whom vagina gazing is indeed an important feminist practice, seeming to distance or dissociate themselves, or perhaps to even exorcise these ghosts. As with most exorcisms, however, the ritual repetition does more to conjure forth than banish or erase. As Heather Davis suggests, feminist historiography must reckon with the fact that the tormented ghosts will never leave us and never leave us alone, nor should they, for the brutality of the past continues to inform so much of our present moment. We need to find a way to live with these specters. Living with ghosts requires not only discontinue practices of erasure and exorcism, but also respond to the ongoing disruptions and demands ghosts cause in the present. So if not exorcism, then what response is demanded by the paranormal consciousness raisers? What does it feel like to have our paranormal consciousness raised? There's a utopian rearrangement in their call where embodiment is tied to affect and eroticism rather than social order. And so alongside the ghosts of patriarchy's reduction of feminist organizing and gender essentialism's erasure of trans and gender queer folk, emerges a future ghost, the ghosts of bodies, pleasures, and genders signaled otherwise. These multiple ghosts sit uneasily together, disturbing one another, refusing to coordinate a single or simplistic call to action. Gordon suggests that being haunted draws us effectively, sometimes against our will, and always a little bit magically, into the structure of feeling of a reality we come to experience, not as cold knowledge, but as a transformative recognition. Transformative recognition helps clarify how experiencing haunting is not a straightforward exchange between a performer and a spectator, where instructions for reparations are passed from the dead to the living. Instead, I think of this affective transmission as more similar to José Muñoz's definition of queer ephemera. Queerness is often transmitted covertly. This has everything to do with the fact that leaving too much of a trace has meant that the queer subject has left herself open for attack. Instead of being clearly available as visible evidence, queerness has instead existed as innuendo, gossip, fleeting moments and performances that are meant to be interacted with by those within its epistemological sphere, while evaporating of the touch of those who would eliminate queer possibility. For Muñoz, queer acts are a form of ephemera, or in my reading, a haunting. They are brief, effectively charged interactions that require the co-presence of a spectator, co-performer, or shall we say medium, who is in the know, a particular agent who is special in their ability to perceive the presence of queerness, whose touch, and I would note Muñoz's use of touch here rather than perception or recognition, opens rather than forecloses future queer relations. Mediums, especially queer mediums, have the quality of being always already haunted, and it is this already hauntedness that allows them to sense the presence of the ghost. So perhaps having one's paranormal consciousness raised is a reminder of the ways one is always already haunted. Further, perhaps this moment of transformative recognition collapses the divide between the haunted and the haunting. Following Sarah Ahmed, we might let this sense of wrong lead us towards the path of the feminist Killjoy, for whom the Kastle is named. Like the Killjoy, the medium becoming ghost discovers that when you expose a problem, you pose a problem. When as mediums we recognize a haunting, we might take it as a sign that we too must become ghosts. And in fact, we have already become ghosts. When we are already haunted, we are already haunting. We might commit to disturbing the disturbed and recognize that when we put ghost drag on, we might never take it off. We might even take up the performative promise of Eve Tuck and C. Ree. I am a future ghost. I am getting ready for my haunting. So to talk more about future ghosts, I'm going to start talking about Ancestors Can You Read Us? Dispatches from the Future. And again, I encourage you to take a look at these links. You can watch the video I'm about to talk about. It's 3 minutes and 15 seconds on Ware's website. and you can take a look at pictures of the installations at the Toronto Biennial website. I've also put the link here for his talk, Art, Activism, Futurity, which was one of the Tannenbaum lectures in 2019 as part of the Biennial. And if you need inspiration right now for how art can help move us out of the many crises we are in, I cannot recommend that talk enough. It is life-changing. But we're going to talk about the installation. Ancestors, Can You Read Us? Dispatches from the Future was a part of the 2019 Toronto Biennial of Art. 8-channel video was installed along the Celaya J. Backyar new media wall at the Ryerson Image Center, where visitors to the building were greeted by a 3-minute and 15-second message of hope interlaced with warnings of disaster. As a signal from the speculative future connects with the present video feed, the 8 screens arranged in a 2x4 grid flicker with distinct images of vividly colored visual noise. One by one, they are replaced with images from 2019's past and present. Suffragettes march for the vote on black and white footage, while atomic test sites flicker in bursts of color that blind the camera, and forests burn in unmanageable wildfires. One by one appear the faces of the future, a trio of young people, each presented through their own feed, clearly beckoning from a field of blue skies and power lines. Hello? Do you read us? Do you copy? While 2 elders adjust equipment in a crowded neon-hued space, their text muffled yet audible. The 8 feeds consolidate into one large image as a youth clarifies, "We are your great-grandchildren, and we have a message for you." The singular feed is then replaced by 4 horizontally doubled loops, the 2 outer feeds streaming images of Black couples of many genders dancing and kissing in the public street, while the 2 inner streams images of police brutality during the 1992 Los Angeles riots that followed the arrest and beating of Rodney King. The contrast between the joy of the outer images and the horror of the inner is palpable. When the 8 feeds again consolidate as the blurred faces of the younger descendants stand above the camera, cutting in and out of focus, rearranging groupings as if waiting for a response to rise from below. The great-grandchildren echo again. Do you read us? Do you copy? Just these first 30 seconds of the video loop are indicative of the haunting work that Ware and his collaborators create through Ancestors. The future ghosts of Ancestors are both more direct in their demands than the paranormal consciousness raisers, but also more concerned with the form their ancestral medium's response will take. Their haunted and haunting refrain, "Do you read us? Do you copy?" queries both the legibility of haunting and the possibility of reproducing or repeating the future. Ware suggests his vision of the future is a form of speculative fiction, and he draws on Waldia Amarisha's expansive yet material definition. Whenever we try to envision a world without war, without violence, without prisons, without capitalism, we are engaging in speculative fiction. All organizing is speculative fiction. Ware suggests art as yet another manifestation of this practice. I've been creating new work that presupposes Black and Indigenous people survive. We survive climate change, we survive white supremacy, we survive capitalism, we survive and we thrive. By imagining a future wherein we actually survive, where we refuse to die, and where we complete our escape to a final true freedom, we're engaging in speculative fiction. Perhaps all art is too, for artists literally help us paint our futures into reality, drawing and sculpting possible ways of being together in the future. I am tempted to align these definitions of speculative fiction as an example of what for Muñoz is queerness as a utopian performative. Queerness is a structuring and educated mode of desiring that allows us to see beyond the quagmire of the present. We must dream and enact new and better pleasures, other ways of being in the world, and ultimately new worlds. However, where speculative fiction differs from utopian performatives is Muñoz's rejection of these performatives offering models, maps, or blueprints of what the future might look like, because utopia can never be prescriptive of futurity. I understand haunting as working uneasily between the more concrete visions offered by speculative fiction and the open potentiality of utopian performatives. Haunting requires both the material practices in the present that conjure ghosts, as well as what Gordon identifies as the seething presences of absent potentials, which for Muñoz is an idealist mode of critique that reminds us that there is something missing. Ancestors' refrain, "Do you read me? Do you copy?" gestures to transitive work of haunting between the effective potential and material practice. There's a circularity to the guidance the future ghosts offer. You told us how to build this technology to contact you, so that we can tell you to act, to rebel, to take this earth back from the capitalists. The great-grandchildren tell the viewer in cascading, repeating, interweaving, and interrupted signals. Missing a crucial directive of how, the ancestral medium remains disturbed and undirected by this something to be done. The haunted message is never fully read, recognized, or decoded, and the manual to the revolution remains lost in the static. Despite this, the haunted possibility of copying or reproducing the future becomes activated as potential practice. In one clip, one of the great-grandchildren holds a paper sign that demands, "Get it together," which is subsequently replaced with a different ghost whose sign promises, "You've got all you need to turn this around." The great-grandchildren do not tell their ancestors what to do, how to act, how to respond, and only serve to remind the mediums that they already have the necessary tools. To copy the future ghosts, these mediums will have to copy their already haunted selves. They will need to be reminded of and by the future in order to activate. The work of this haunting, like all hauntings, is primarily effective, generating hope, desire, and disturbance. The ghosts might be speculative, fictive for now, but their haunted effects and affects are not. And so to close, I just wanted to reiterate sort of, I think, the three main questions I'm trying to work through both in this talk and in the larger project, and hope that this could stimulate whatever form of conversation we have. So the first idea being living with ghosts and transformative recognition. Basically this question of how do we perform practices that allow for ghostly interruption, disturbance, agency, and transformation, and primarily looking for practices that are not exorcism, but not necessarily just repetition either. So what exists between those two? The second idea is the role of the medium, the person who can touch queer ephemera. And this idea, if the medium is already haunted, how is she already haunting? So how does the medium collapse that binary between dead ghost and living human? And finally, this idea of the future ghost or haunted desires. So how does the siring difference allow from hauntings from the speculative future as well as the traumatic past? Ghosts are most often, I think, talked about in terms of trauma and history. And I'm very interested in what they mean for thinking about futurity as well. That is it. This is probably too long. Thank you so much for watching. And I hope to interact with you through other means of the conference soon.